This week's parasha is Parashat Tzav, and the parasha begins by giving us additional details of various sacrifices that are brought in the temple. And then when you come to chapter 7, towards the end of chapter 7, 22nd pasuk, God speaks to Moshe, Daber al bnei Yisrael lemor kol chelav shor v'chesed v'ez lo tochelu. And then the continuation later, V'chol dam lo tochlu b'chol moshvotechem la'of v'rabheima kol nefesh asher tochal kol dam v'nichreta ha'nefesh ahi meyameh. So the Torah here, towards the end of this chapter, details two prohibitions. The first is eating certain fats of the animal. They are forbidden. And the second is the prohibition to eat or to drink blood. These are severe prohibitions. They are found in the context of the sacrifices and the rules of sacrifice, and they are detailed here in this week's parsha. The nature of the prohibition of chelav and dam is explained by the Ramban, Nachmanides, in conjunction with verses that appear also in the book of Vayikra, in chapter 17. Chapter 17 begins by saying that anyone of Israel who decides to slaughter an animal in the camp or outside the camp, but did not bring this animal as a sacrifice to God, so should be cut off from the community. Concerning this verse, chapter 17, verse number 4, we have a dispute in the Talmud, and a similar dispute among the commentaries on the Torah, in this case Rashi on one hand and the Ramban on the other. What is the Torah referring to in Vayikra, chapter 17? Rashi understands that the prohibition has to do with somebody that set aside a sacrifice, and the Torah prohibits slaughtering that sacrifice any place except in the precincts of the Mishkan, in the temple. The Ramban, however, disagrees. The Ramban says that the plain reading of the Torah does not suggest that it's talking about a sacrifice at all, but rather the Ramban says what the Torah prohibited in the desert was to slaughter any animal that could be brought as a sacrifice. In other words, in order to eat an animal in the desert, says the Ramban, as Israel travels through the desert, it was necessary, if possible, to bring the animal as a sacrifice. Only then could the one who brings the animal participate in the sacrifice, eat the sacrifice, or the portions of the sacrifice that are permitted to eat. The point of the Ramban is that fundamentally the life, human life, animal life, belongs to God. There is a divine dispensation to allow people to eat meat, but in the desert, when we traveled together with the tabernacle, together with the Mishkan, the permissibility was a function of bringing it as a sacrifice. The Ramban himself adds that later in the Torah, in the book of Devarim, the Torah speaks of coming into the land and having a particular holy place that God is choosing. And then the Torah says, since you're far away from the place, it becomes permissible to eat meat, as long as you ritually slaughter the animal in your own precincts. It's not necessary to travel to the holy site to eat meat. That's a dispensation. But fundamentally, in principle, says the Ramban, life belongs to God. And that's the same reasoning that the Ramban suggests for the prohibition of chelav and dam. Chelav and dam are the two parts of the animal that are brought upon the altar. The blood is sprinkled on the altar, the fats of the animal are burnt on the altar. And that's a demonstration, says the Ramban, that all life belongs to God. Yes, the Torah under certain circumstances, says the Ramban, permits humans to indulge by eating meat, but with the recognition that fundamentally it comes from God. Only God has the right to allow us to partake of animals, of meat, because they too were created by God. The earth is the Lord's, is a basic theme of Sefer Vayikra, and it finds the particular expression in the prohibition, says the Ramban, of blood and of chaylev, and is deeply connected to the larger program of Sefer Vayikra, the book of holiness, and the book which is an expression of the fact, as it says later, Ki li haaretz, that the earth is mine. Shabbat Shalom.